Hey, so I had an idea last night that I should probably start a new 3D project. Uh, in my personal time recently, I've been doing like a painting a day, a digital painting a day, or a biro drawing a day, and I really enjoy doing that. But in addition to that, I think I'm going to try and start like a smaller personal project before I maybe ramp up into a bigger one in the future later on in the year. So what you can see on my screen is something that I just doodled at lunchtime at work today because I was getting the itch to make a project. Um, so I thought I would make some videos about it and we'll see how it goes. It might end up being that I don't finish the project. Certainly before my last project that I did, I went through about 7 projects that ended up being abandoned, but I'm feeling good about this one, so we'll see how it goes. So I've started out with, yeah, this doodle. That came about because I was looking at my Pinterest board from my project that I made my last video about. And as you can see, there's magpies. I really like magpies. I wanted to do some for my last project, but I just didn't in the end. So I thought I would try one for this project. Aside from the hankering to make some birds, I was also struck by this image on my Pinterest board, which I'd saved when I was thinking about props that could go in my diorama scene. So I'm gonna take the colours in this. I really like them. Um, and I put them into this concept that I did. I literally just superimposed them onto a sort of remotely vase shaped image. Um, Added the magpie in and started thinking about how I was going to manage the colours in the scene. I wanted to make it colourful because if something isn't colourful, I don't really enjoy working on it. So once I had this vase going on, which is the first thing I added, and the magpie, I started to think about how the colours work together. So I'm just going to see if I can turn off all the layers in this. I sort of fiddled about with the layers as I went, but I began with a blue background and I ended up painting it black. But that's literally what I started out with, just like this vase shape. Um, and I did the magpie and a shadow. And I was thinking about sort of bases that it would go on, so probably something grassy, or maybe something with a bit of stone in there. And it just built up from there. So I went from having just a vase with a magpie on it to a vase on some grass, um, maybe some flowers in the grass that would match the flowers on the vase. Um, and then I thought it would be nice to have some bigger pink flowers that framed the magpie. So we've got the pink of the flower on the vase, the pinkish red of the actual flowers in the vase, maybe they'll be roses or something, framing the dark blue and black and the contrasting white of the magpie. I'll probably have elements of white in the vase. This isn't the final design, this is just me thinking about the colours I could use. Contrasting areas of white will probably work nicely with the bright colours. And then, as I tend to do, I've moved through the colour wheel from reddish pink to more reddish pink, a slightly more orangey colour, and then bright orange and almost yellow orange in the flowers on the grass. And we've got some really nice bright green as well to complement the orange. The plan for this piece is to have it be a smaller piece that I can work on just to tide me over while I don't really want to work on a bigger 3D project. So the idea is hopefully I'll be able to experiment with materials because I'm going to use PBR for this piece, I think. I'm going to get some nice lighting in, hopefully, even though it's a small piece. We can maybe fake some dappled tree lighting on it. We'll see how it turns out. But apart from that, apart from what you're seeing on the screen right now, I don't really have any plans for this. And I will just sort of make videos as I go and see where the project takes me. Hopefully it'll work. So with this in mind, I'm going to go ahead and start doing a bit more research into this. I'm going to maybe look on Pinterest at some ideas, not spend too long on there, don't want to waste any time. but I'll probably look at Pinterest, maybe make a 3D block out for this, just something really quick. I'll whack it in Unreal Engine 4 and I will start doing some overpaints to make the final concept, where I start thinking about the design that will go on the vase, what the flowers are going to be, maybe lighting setups. We'll see what happens. So I will try and keep recording while I do that, and I will maybe put some time lapses into this video for you to look at as I go. Here we go. So what I'm doing while I'm looking on Pinterest is starting out in my original diorama board and just grabbing the images that I like. I know that I want to make a vase, so I looked at floral vase but wasn't really getting what I wanted, and I have a vase called a Moorcroft vase, so I decided to look that up first. And then I know what colour flowers I want, so I'm just googling the colour of the flowers that I want, so orange and red, and within that I'm finding that I like peonies and things like dandelions, so I'm just grabbing those and sticking those on my board as well. I obviously know that I want paving stones in there, so I'm just having a quick look at that as well, but I'm struggling to find exactly what I want, so I might need to go back at some point. Here I'm just looking through boards that I've already made for stuff that I might like. I've got quite a few boards, so I'm just grabbing stuff off those as well. And then I've looked up an artist here that I like called Espen, and there's a feel to his work that I really like, so I'm just going for that. Abandoned places, there might be something there that I could go with, so I'm just having a quick look at damaged buildings, destroyed buildings, damaged paving. You always get nice textures out of things like that. So I've made a Pinterest board, make that full screen. I've pinned bits and bobs. There's not much on here right now. I'll add to it as I go, and maybe if I find stuff on Google Images. Sometimes you can't find the stuff you want on Pinterest because it's all too pretty. For instance, I couldn't find images of like broken paving stone, which I might refer to, so at some point I'll probably Google that and add some images to this. But for the most part, I think I have what I want. I pinned that twice. Some stuff doesn't really make sense, I guess. Like for instance, this image has nothing to do with what I've made in my concept so far, but I kind of like the idea of these broken slabs of rock, so I just pinned it. I liked the flowers in this image, not so much the house. This paving stone image, which is just a beauty shot of someone's garden. I liked the colours of the paving here. I might experiment with different coloured paving. I like the colours on the shrubs in this image, so I might experiment with those colours. This is the kind of feel I want to go for. I really like Espen's work. Just a few things that caught my eye, not necessarily things I was looking for in the first place, but stuff you stumble across as well is always nice to save and see what you can do with it later. Even stuff you never end up using for this project, it's good to have this stuff in one place. Like for instance with my abandoned building diorama, I went back to the board for that to come up with the idea for the project I'm now working on. So it's always good to have this stuff saved if it inspires you. So now using these images, I will see about making a more finalised concept and paint it over a 3D base, which I will make next. I'll save you the pain of watching me dance around. It goes on for a little while. I'm cutting that right out. Here we go in 3ds Max. So I'm starting out with the spline tool to make the general shape of my vase, and I'm putting a lathe modifier on that, and then you can drag it out and it will pick your axis point and duplicate the geometry around in a circle, so it's really good for making vases and like pillars and stuff that you want to be the same all the way around, because you can just draw the edge shape and it creates a circle from that for you. And then I'm just creating a quick base from a cylinder, and again using the spline tool to just make some really quick stalks for the flowers. I'm keeping everything quite chunky so that I can overpaint it and get some nice shading over it once I put it into Unreal Engine as well. And then just creating some really quick pyramids for the flowers. Nothing fancy. I'm just copying what I've got in my concept. I'm also making some very quick paving stone sort of things. They won't necessarily be the final thing in the final concept, but just so I can see how the light's falling on them as well. And then here I'm beginning to make a very quick blobby magpie shape. It's beautiful. This is going to be the tail feathers. I just want to make the general shapes of what I want at the moment, and that will give me something that I can paint over, but once it's in Unreal Engine I'll have something that I can use as a template for when I'm creating my final scene that will match the placement of everything in my block out. So I'm making some really rubbish looking geometry for the birds, and people are probably tearing their hair out because I'm not very technical when it comes to good modelling techniques. I should probably learn some more of that. Once I've got these pieces together, I can just really quickly import them into Unreal Engine. I'll import them each as separate objects, and then as I finalise the geometry for these pieces I'll just be able to replace them, and it'll save me having to import new geometry, rename it, and put it in the position that I want it in. Trying to get the dimensions vaguely correct and adding a little curve to the tail as well to give it some personality. So I'm going to cut out the bit where I spend ages importing it. I start a new Unreal Engine scene with no starter content, just a standard scene. And the first thing I do is I create a sphere just from the existing geometry that you have in Unreal Engine, and I apply a flat black material to it that has emissive on, two-sided and unlit, and I apply it to that sphere and make the sphere really big so I have a flat black background to work with, and I set the sphere to not cast shadows, and then throw my items into the scene, and I've just put a flat white material on it just so I can see it a bit better than with the default checker material. So that's my pieces into the scene, and I decided that I probably want something a bit bigger on the base for some lighting to fall onto, so I get some nice shadows, because what I'm going to do is add in some dappled lighting, just using some geometry planes, and I want more than just the little vase and disc that it's on to catch the shadows. So jumping back into 3ds Max, what I'm doing here is just making loads of cylinders really quick, and I'll attach all of those together, and this is going to behave as my temporary leaf plane, so it will create fake cast shadows on my scene. So it looks like there's a tree casting shadows on my scene, and I'll duplicate that around as much as I need it to be. Definitely not a final thing, just something to get the feel what I want. And here I'm rotating the items themselves so I can see what kind of shadows I can get falling on them, but I actually opt to go back to how it was in the first place, with the shadow coming down from the top left and falling to the right. At this point I call it done, but then, oh no, I come back. I decide that I think it would be good to maybe have something else in the scene in addition to just the vase and the magpie. So I decide to add in a gravestone, and we'll see how that goes, but it kind of gives the story to the scene a bit more, I don't know, yeah, it just gives it a bit more of a story. Why would there just be a vase sat there? Nobody knows, but if there's a gravestone, maybe it would make sense for there to be a vase on the ground with some flowers in. So I throw that into Unreal Engine, put the material on it, and it gives me some nice cast shadows as well with the dappled lighting falling down it. What I'm doing here now is I'm adding some cameras so I can get some fixed points to look at the scene. They're very helpful because you can actually pin them. So I'm just clicking the pin there, and then what I can do is move around the scene independently of that, and I can move my leaf planes around. So I'm trying to get the shadows to cast on the gravestone behind it, but not on the bird. So if the bird is lit, there will be shadows on the gravestone behind it, and vice versa. And that just means that they stand out from each other a bit more, and you get that contrast, and the scene is a bit easier to read. So I've got 2 camera actors set up here, just looking at different sides of the scene so that it looks good from multiple angles. And then I can use these for my concepting to paint over. Ta-da! I took these images of my blockouts from Unreal Engine. So I took 3 views. I've got this one from further away, and this one from a different angle as well. So you can see how the lighting's falling on it from different angles. I particularly like how the bird stands out on the black shadow here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this image and I'm going to overpaint it, add colour and rendering and grass. I'm not very much of a concept artist, but I do enjoy painting, so we'll see how this turns out, and I will record the screen as I go. I always find it best to start concepts working over a 3D render. You don't necessarily have to, and sometimes I don't, but with this one in particular I thought it would just be easier for me to have something to work over. So along with my initial sketch, I've got this 3D render. And it just gives me a sense of the lighting that I'm working with, though in the end I sort of end up obliterating it a little bit, but at the end of the day the final 3D piece will be an amalgamation of testing lighting and just fiddling about with stuff, so you don't have to be too serious with how the lighting turns out in this. It's always just nice to experiment. So I start out just working over my 3D render with the colours that I want. I'm colour picking a little bit from my sketch that I did. I'm trying to reinforce the colours from working down from red through the colour wheel and pink, and just working a bit illustratively here as well, which I end up kind of ruining as well. As I'm working, I'm always going back to my Pinterest board, which I have on my other screen, or Google Images if I need something else, constantly adding to my Pinterest board. It's quite a fluid process, so with this, if I'm finding the 3D blockout isn't really working for me and I'm not getting enough information from that, I can very easily go back to my 3D blockout, edit something, and then re-import it and take another screenshot. With this, I don't do that, but for instance, if I wanted to change the shape of the gravestone or something like that, and I needed something to work over, I could very easily just edit that in 3ds Max. so I'm not working too seriously. You can see I'm experimenting with the shape of the gravestone here. I'm not sure if I'll end up keeping it that way. What looks good in 2D doesn't necessarily work in 3D, especially when you've got lighting that is changing constantly in Unreal Engine, for instance. I'm thinking a little bit about the design on the vase as well, but I don't finalise it too much, because what I will do is make a sketch for that in a separate concept and work from that, and that'll help me with my texturing as well, because I can just use the sketch, put it into a texture and then finalise it. The colours of shadows and the colours of the lighting as well are very difficult to sort of determine when you're, especially when you're a bit rubbish at 2D like I am, and you don't know how exactly lighting is going to work when you've got the colours of the textures on things. In the 3D blockout you could always add like a sort of blockout texture, so when the lighting falls on it you'll get a better idea of what the lighting will look like in the end in terms of colours. I just sort of winged it, and I will see what I can do with the lighting to make it match in Unreal Engine. A good thing to do when you're creating concepts is, for instance, if you have a Pinterest board, take materials from that Pinterest board. For instance, for the gravestone, I imagine it would be some sort of stone, light coloured stone, so I could get an image of that and place it in the concept, just so I have something to refer to, both when I'm creating the concept and also when I'm making the 3D model, so I don't have to constantly be skipping into Google Images or my Pinterest board to double check what materials I'm using. I was struggling a bit at this point. You can see I pulled a face. Sometimes there is just a stage in concepting where things don't really work out, just have to push through it, and I did get past that. With this I was struggling with the colour of the shadows and the lights, so what I did was I just went in and sort of blatted in a colour, and then once you've got like a colour base to work with rather than just noodling at stuff, it kind of helps you solidify your idea a little bit. I was working a bit with these shards of tile for a while, sort of black and white tile. I might bring that back in when I'm working in 3D, but I found that in the concepts they became a bit distracting on the ground. I sort of tried to make it work for ages, and in the end just painted them out because they were sort of ruining the effect of the light on the ground, and I just didn't really like where it was going, and why would there be tiles there anyway? Because I wanted to go for a more illustrative look for this, I do spend a while sort of rendering the lighting and trying to get the lighting right. If you're working just to create a really quick concept, you could literally do something in half an hour with like photographs, like I did with my initial sketch, and then work these things out for yourself in 3D. A lot of stuff will change from this concept, purely because maybe something doesn't work quite right, or I change my mind, or something's not clear on the concept. I'm still not 100% clear about what will happen on the ground where the vase is placed, because at the moment I just have like a cylinder of stone next to the grave, and it doesn't really make sense, so I'll probably end up just modifying that to something that makes a bit more sense when it comes to 3D. When you're creating a concept for yourself, you can get away with being a bit vague and just thinking that you'll come back to it later and plan stuff out. can see that sometimes I switch to black and white, and it's just good to check values. I have my black and white value checker set up bound to Control Y. That's something that I learned from the artist Tom Scholes, who did a post about this. So if you go to Proof Setup and click Custom, it'll come up with a window called Customize Proof Condition. If you click Device to Simulate, and I have it set to dot grain 20%, and just press OK. And now when you press Control Y, it will switch to black and white. And it's a little bit different to just putting a grayscale filter over your image or setting it to be completely desaturated. I will get the link for Tom Scholes' article on it because I can't remember the ins and outs, but I think it's really interesting, and as well it just makes it much quicker to make something black and white. As I went along with this, at the end of this session, I went to some friends and asked for some critique, and their critiques were really helpful in helping me tweak my concept a little bit, just so it was a bit less flat than it is right now. A lot of the shapes are all the same size in this, so the flowers are the same size as the bird, and that doesn't really make sense necessarily. And it's always good to have a variation of sizes. After I had some feedback from friends, I made a set of variations, just taking my concept, putting it on one layer and just dragging bits around. So what they said was the flowers are the same size as the bird. The bird is perhaps a bit small and the flowers are perhaps a bit big, so I experimented with the scale of the flowers and made the flowers smaller, and made the bird bigger as well. So on the top left here I have the original, and on the right hand side I have 4 variations that I made, so moving the bird around, resizing flowers. I think at the moment for me I like the idea of scaling up the bird. I want to keep it sat on the vase, even if it doesn't really make sense. Maybe the vase would fall over, but it kind of keeps the focal point that I wanted with the flowers surrounding the bird. I think I might try making the flowers a bit smaller, maybe like smaller blossom kind of sized flowers, and in the end I may also add a second magpie. We'll see what happens with that. I like the way that the bird points to the right while the shadows fall in the opposite direction, kind of creates a variation in the direction of the lines in the image. But again, a lot of this stuff is things that you kind of work out when you go into 3D, and because I'm concepting for myself, I can keep everything quite loose and experimental, and just see what happens. So here I am going in and applying the changes that had come about from getting critique. So I'm downsizing the flowers and I've scaled up the bird as well. I kind of wanted some of the flowers to overlap behind the bird. That was a suggestion that I'd had, and I think that's kind of cool. So as you can see, it looks a bit better. And I actually ended up combining the flowers from the original design and the smaller flowers so that the canopy of flowers feels a bit fuller. Adding some light to the flowers so that they stand out a little bit from the background. And then what I did was I tried to solidify the design on the gravestone a little bit more. What the cracks would be like, what would be written on the gravestone. I didn't want to have too much writing, so actually I decided I'd have quite a lot of the writing obscured by cracks and damage on the gravestone, and I think that would be really fun to practice sculpting cracks into rock as well. I think it would be nice as well to have some moss or something growing out of the cracks on the gravestone, but we'll see how that goes. adding some cuts into the silhouette of the gravestone as well. What I also did was I took my 3D render that I'd made and put it onto a layer at the very top and added it as an overlay, and I just reduced the opacity right down. And sometimes it doesn't work very well, but in this case it just added a little bit more variation to the lighting, and gave the sense of it being a bit brighter and illuminated by the sun, because I hadn't deviated too much from the shapes in my block out. You can see how it adds a bit of value variation in the shadows. And here we go. Feeling pretty happy with this. It's not by any means a beautiful painting, but it gives me a good base to work from. And that's that. So in this video I have made an initial concept sketch, a 3D block out, a set of concept variations and a final concept. So next I will make some sort of design plan for the vase, and I'll think a bit more about what materials I'm going to use, and what kind of flowers and foliage I'll be using. So I'm going to do that myself, and I will show that in the next video. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I can't guarantee exactly when the next video will be. I have too much stuff to do too often for me to be able to do a video like every week or whatever. I will work on my project when I can, I will record it and I will make a video. So I hope you watch the next one.